Okay, so as I said, this is the third part of the apology. We'll probably continue the apology next lecture. So on Thursday at 1 p.m., I'll be recording what I think will be the final lecture on the apology. So if you haven't finished this reading, you should go ahead and finish it. Get through Plato's apology. As I said a moment ago before I started recording, today we're going to get through most of, if not all of, what you might consider Socrates' defense, his defense in the trial. And let's just remind ourselves, he's on trial for impiety, right? That's one of the charges, and corrupting the youth. Wow, every time so I'm clicking on this PowerPoint and it's really messing up my Zoom. Now I can't see you guys. All right, well, hopefully this will work. Okay, so anyway, impiety and corrupting the youth. So far, all we've really covered is the early part of the dialogue where, he begins by, I guess the very first thing he does is he distinguishes between his manner of speaking. He speaks the truth. His accusers spoke persuasively. What they said appeared to be true, but upon further reflection and investigation, we sort of uncover that they are actually, their charges are without merit. At least this is what Socrates is trying to convince us of. And so how does he begin his defense? We ended the last lecture, we ended with this. So hopefully most of the people that were here have had time to watch that lecture. If you weren't there, you were able to watch it. It's been posted since last week. But at the tail end of the last lecture, we talked about, how I kind of asked the question. I sort of left the question open. Like, how is this story?
I'll do it for you.
I think someone's got their microphone unmuted and they got some background noise. So if that's you, please, please turn off your mic. I think I figured out who it was. All right. So sorry. So I think again, I ended the last lecture with a sort of a question, and someone, I forget, might be somebody who was here, might be one of my 1 p.m. class. Someone had a pretty good answer, but to me, there's a couple answers to the question I asked. What was the question that I asked? I was asking, well, when Socrates tells us his story, when he begins his quote unquote defense, his apologia, why does he tell us this story, and how is this a part of his defense? This story about how, his friend went to visit the oracle, and the oracle told his friend that Socrates, or there were none wiser than Socrates. And then he explains how, he was confused by this, that the way he reacted was he didn't understand the oracle. How could the oracle say that he was the wisest when he was very aware that there were many things he lacked knowledge of? And so surely there were other people who knew more things about beauty and justice and all these other things. So he investigates. He goes to the politicians. He goes to the poets. He goes to the craftsmen, right? We covered all this last time. How is this a part of his defense? I think somebody got, I probably should have reviewed the video before class today. But I think somebody got one of the reasons why this might be a defense, and I think it was basically, I forget exactly the words the student was using, but he said something like, he's kind of trying to undermine his accusers. It's not that he's addressing the charges, he's just undermining his accusers. Something to that effect. He's not showing that he's right. He's showing that they're wrong. I think that was his exact words. It's not that he's kind of proving he's right. He's proving that they're wrong. And in a sense, yeah, I think that's correct. Dylan, was that you that was saying that? Maybe I see your hand went up. Did you want?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That's why I raised my hand. That's what I was saying. Like he underlined it, that he kind of, in order for me to be right, you got to be wrong. So.
Yeah. So he's sort of showing to me part of this story is, look, I went to talk to politicians, poets, craftsmen. These men were highly regarded. They had a lot of power, prestige in the city, and I went asking them questions, and I made them look a little foolish, and so they're mad at me, right? They have a bias against me. It's not that I'm really disrespecting the gods. I'm not being so the charges. I'm not being impious at all. In fact, and I'm going to argue here in a minute. I'll reread the quote that I ended with. I'm going to argue that in fact, part of his defense here is that he's showing piety. This story that he's telling us demonstrates that he's being pious. Um, but it's not just that. He's saying, well, look, these guys don't like me, so they're making all this stuff up. You know, they don't like me. I'm going around questioning them. I'm showing them that they don't know things they think they know, and they're getting angry. And I'm basically questioning these people with a lot of authority. They're going to retaliate. So let me find the quote that I'm talking about. I think it's on page 26 if you have the handout, but let me make sure. Let me get to it real quick. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure I read, this is what I read at the end of the last lecture, but it's fine. We can reread it and kind of pick up where we left off. He says, as a result of this investigation, men of Athens, and again, this is on 26. It's the first full paragraph. As a result of this investigation, men of Athens, I acquired much unpopularity of a kind that is hard to deal with and is a heavy burden. Many slanders came from these people and a reputation for wisdom. For in each case, the bystanders thought that I myself possessed the wisdom that I proved my interlocutor did not have. A couple things here. One is sort of, I think with Dylan's point, that I mentioned already. He says, look, I'm becoming unpopular. All this slander, right? I go around people, they don't like me. And also the second point, he says that they think he knows stuff because he questions them about their views of justice and their views of honor and their views of bravery. And he picks their answers apart and he shows them that their answers are not satisfactory and that in fact they don't know the things that they think they know. Their reaction to him is to assume that he has all the answers. And he doesn't really think he does. He just knows he doesn't. He's aware of his own ignorance. And so this is where he gets to, I guess, what you might call the moral of the story. He says, what is probable, gentlemen, is that in fact the god is wise. So remember, the oracle is speaking for the god Apollo. So he says the god is right. When Apollo says that I'm the wisest, he's correct. The god is wise. And his oracular response meant that human wisdom is worth little or nothing. And that when he says this man Socrates, he's just using my name as an example, as if he said, this man among you mortals is wisest, who, like Socrates, understands that his wisdom is worthless. And so even now I continue this investigation as the god bade me. And I go around seeking out anyone, citizen or stranger, whom I think wise. And then if I do not think he is wise, I come to the assistance of the god, and I show him that he's not wise. Because of this occupation, I do not have the leisure to engage in public affairs to any extent, nor indeed to look after my own. But I live in great poverty because of my service to the god. So what's he doing there in that last little passage I read? Before, I think we've already established that he's showing that his accusers are biased. They don't like him. He made them look bad. Now he has this reputation. It's all unfounded. But what else is he saying here at the end? How else is he defending himself? I think this is more direct. This is a direct address to the charge, at least the first charge, of impiety. Anybody have any guesses? Anyone to jump in with that? I mean, what's he basically saying? I'll read it again. So the moral of the story, what did the oracle mean when the oracle said that there are none wiser than Socrates? Well, basically, he's wiser. We kind of talked about this enough, I think, last time. He's wiser because he realizes how little he knows. He realizes that human wisdom is worthless, as he puts it here. But even after he found out the meaning of the riddle and what the oracle meant. And I guess you could argue that's nothing special. We could all be just as wise as Socrates. All we have to do is acknowledge what we don't know and that we don't know it and all this stuff. But once he realized what the oracle meant and what the riddle meant, he still went around asking questions, and he still went around showing people that they weren't wise when they thought they were, despite the fact that it got him into a lot of trouble. Why did he continue to do that, according to him? Right? He says, I go around seeking out anyone, citizen or stranger. I don't care. I'm not going to judge foreigner, friend, foe. I want to know anybody who might have wisdom. If I think that they have wisdom, I'll go question them. And then if I find out they're not wise, I'll show them they're not wise. I come to the assistance of the god, hint, hint, and show him that he's not wise. Because of this occupation, I do not have the leisure to engage in public affairs to any extent, nor indeed to look after my own, but I live in great poverty because of my service to the god. Does this sound like somebody who's being impious? Well, according to him, no. I'm doing this as a service to the god. In fact, I'm taking a personal risk to myself and my family. I'm not able to provide for them. I can't be a success in any public affairs because I have to go around questioning people at much cost to myself, my reputation, right? So, if anything, I, Socrates, am being super pious, says Socrates. But that's not all, right? I guess this is the first part of his defense. And I think, again, we covered it, I think, in more, a little bit more detail last time. So I'm going to move on a bit quickly here. What follows after this is more of a traditional sort of direct defense. And so he's, I guess you could argue that at this point, he's, in a roundabout way, he's addressed the charge of impiety. Yes, I'm being pious. I'm doing what the God wants me to do. I'm on a mission from the God, basically. The God wants me to stamp out ignorance and reveal people their own ignorance, right? Reveal to people their own ignorance. All these people who have a pretense for knowledge, I'll show them that that's absolutely just a pretense. But the next part, again, is a more conventional approach to defense and more direct, and he's gonna focus on the second charge of corruption. And I've got to be honest with you here. I don't really think this is the strongest part of the dialogue, or whatever you want to call this, the strongest part of this reading of this defense. I think some of these arguments that Socrates present in this portion of the dialogue, I think, are a bit flimsy, a bit sneaky, to use an academic term. But I call this section here the cross-examination. And why? Because this is where I guess this is what would qualify this as a dialogue and not just a monologue. There is a little bit of back and forth. Socrates begins to question one of his accusers, namely Meletus, and Meletus is not portrayed in a very good light here. He comes off as a bit of a buffoon. So the first thing that Socrates asks him is about this notion of corruption. And I think he's being a bit ironic. And I mean, who knows what his tone is? We're reading this, and you have to sort of inflect at, I guess it's a bit subjective how you do the inflections. But he seems to be kind of taunting Meletus when he asks him, hey, first he starts by praising him. Good for you, Meletus, for bringing me to court. If I'm really corrupting the youth, this is very serious, and good for you for caring so much about the youth of Athens, so much that you would bring me to court if I'm doing such a thing. And I guess to me this is, I'm just imagining him being a bit facetious and kind of ironic in his tone when he says this. And then he asks Meletus, he says, okay, so since obviously you know so much about corruption, and you're so sure that I corrupt the youth, then certainly you know what would improve the youth. I corrupt them, you say. Well, who is it precisely, who is it that improves the youth? And what sort of answer do we get from Meletus? Well, I would say it's not a very honest answer. Anybody want to chime in? who got this far in the reading and knows. Meletus basically, well, he doesn't really give a straight answer at first. He seems to try to evade answering the question. So when Socrates asks Meletus, who is it that improves the youth? He doesn't really want to say anything. He answers, I think the first reply is something like the laws. The laws improve the youth. And Socrates just says, are you kidding me? What are you talking? I'm not asking what, but who? Which person or group of people? Who is it that improves the youth? Not what, not the laws. Sure, you follow the laws. Maybe the laws will guide you. Whatever. Who? I'm a corrupting influence, and Meletus really, he doesn't want to answer, so Socrates kind of helps him and kind of tries to pull the answer. He says, what about all these men here that are on the jury that are overseeing this trial? Do they all, every one of those guys, do they improve the youth? And Meletus says, yes. And so Socrates says, oh, wow, so we seem to be in luck. We have quite a few people here who are able to improve and make our youth better. Well, what about all the other men who are assembled here just to watch the trial? Not the jurors, but everybody else that's here at the assembly. Are they going to improve all of the youth? Do they improve the youth? And Meletus says, yes. And he keeps expanding the scope of the question. How about every Athenian? How about every Greek? And then eventually, basically, we come to the realization that Meletus is, and I don't think Meletus even believes this, but he's going to assert that everybody improves the youth except for Socrates. That Socrates is the only person, at least in Athens, who corrupts the youth. Why would Meletus say this? Is it true? What do you think? You think that's true? Do you think that back then, the only person in the whole Greek world that was a corrupter of youth was one guy named Socrates? Even if he does corrupt the youth, you think there's only one in this huge, what's the likelihood that that's true? Pretty close to zero, I would say. And so there must be some other reason why Meletus is saying it. And most people at the trial probably don't think he's telling the truth. They think he's full of BS. Obviously, if you want somebody to improve your physical fitness, you don't just go to anybody. You go to somebody who's an expert at physical fitness. I think there's a sort of analogy that Socrates likes to use quite a bit. If you want to improve other sorts of skills, you want to learn those skills from someone who's expert at those skills. So when we're looking at making someone a better human being, certainly that's a skill that not just anybody, somebody who has no virtues and nothing good about them, how can they teach somebody? And so obviously what Meletus is saying here is absurd, that everybody corrupts the youth except for this one man, Socrates. So why is he saying it? If it's obviously absurd, most people that have any inkling of the ability to think critically will be able to see right through these statements that no one corrupts the youth but Socrates. So why, again, is Meletus saying it? Well, imagine if he said something else. I've got something in the chat box. Let's see what somebody says. I'll give you a chance to respond. Sorry, it's taking me forever to get the chat box even open. Again, my poor computer. That's just a private note saying, I'm sorry I'm late. If you're late, don't worry, I get it, you're late. But don't interrupt the lecture. Well, interrupt the lecture if you have something to say about the actual lecture. But if you're late, we'll figure it out later. I'm going to take roll at the end anyway, and I'll figure out when you logged in and all that stuff later. So, but yeah, don't worry, you didn't know that, but for future reference, that's the way to handle it. But anyway, so back to the point I was making. Meletus. Why is Meletus saying stuff that's obviously false, saying that, everybody is good and a good role model for our youth, except for this one dude I don't like, Socrates? If he said the opposite, if he was honest, let's say he was really honest, and he was looking around at the crowd, and he was picking out other people who he might not think are good for the youth. If he would have looked at the jury and said, do all those people on the jury improve the youth? I don't know. Maybe most of them. I don't know all of them. Oh, that one guy though, he's kind of sleazy. I wouldn't want my sister hanging out with that guy. Oh, I didn't notice that dude in the back. He's a juror. Oh, geez, I don't trust him either. He's kind of sleazy as well. So if he said that, he would alienate some of the jurors, and he wouldn't be able to get his way. He wouldn't be able to get what he wants. This comes back to that distinction that I keep bringing up. I don't think I've brought it up maybe barely today, but that distinction you find through Plato of appearance versus reality, being persuasive versus being hard to accept. So some things might be persuasive. I think Melitus is trying to be persuasive. He's telling the jurors and everybody there what they want to hear. He's not going to alienate them by saying that some of them are sleazy, or even if there's somebody who's not even there. Socrates asks him, what about all the people who aren't even here right now? They don't corrupt the youth? Well, he doesn't even want to insult them because one of their friends might be there, or a friend of a friend. And so he doesn't want to insult anybody. He's basically, to me, it seems like kissing everyone's ass and trying to get them all against this one guy he doesn't like, Socrates. And to me, this is pretty embarrassing. I kind of wish Socrates would have just left it there, because at this point, in the dialogue, I think that his defense gets a little bit weak, and it just seems like he's using, kind of some flimsy arguments to just trip up Melitus and to confuse him. But maybe that's just my bias. I don't know. Well, let's look at these other arguments. But I think he's got a pretty solid strategy here. He gets Melitus to say things that are obviously absurd, and he makes it even more clear that Melitus just wants it. He just has it out for the guy. He has a vendetta against Socrates, and he's willing to say whatever, whether it's true or not, to paint Socrates in a bad light and to discredit him. So I think that he's pretty effective at that, at doing that up to this point. These next few passages, which I'm not going to spend too much time on, but these next few passages I don't think are quite as strong, and these are where he says a few more things about corruption and the nature of corruption, and he begins his argument with a couple assertions which, on the face of it, seem pretty acceptable. They seem pretty non-controversial. I guess it depends on how you understand these assertions. But again, he begins the argument with a couple assertions, and one of them is that when it comes to corruption, nobody wants to become corrupted. Nobody wants to be corrupted. And then he gets Melitus to sort of accept that. He says, "Who would want to be corrupted? Does anybody want to be corrupted?" And Melitus says, "Well, no, nobody would want to be corrupted." But then he says, "Well, what would result, let's say, if some individual, anybody, myself or you or anybody, what would happen to them if they associated with a bunch of corrupt people? If they hung out with and associated with, and all their friends and family and coworkers and everybody that they hung out with were corrupt? What do you think would result likely in that scenario? Don't you think that they themselves would become corrupted?" And so Melitus acknowledges both of these points. One, that nobody would want to be corrupt. And two, well, if you hang out and you associate with corrupt people, well, that's what's going to happen. You are going to get corrupt. So he starts with these two basic premises, which on the face of them, I suppose, they don't seem that controversial. Then he makes a further assertion, where I think this gets a little bit tricky. He says, well, if that's true, then we can conclude I either don't corrupt the youth, as you say, I don't do it at all, I'm innocent, or if I do it out of ignorance. I do it unknowingly. And so how does that follow? How does that conclusion follow from those two premises? Well, let's walk through this briefly, and I'll tell you why I don't think it's a good argument, ultimately. So we start with the two premises. No one wants to be corrupted. If you hang out with corrupt people, you yourself will become corrupt. So Therefore, he says either he doesn't corrupt the youth or he does it out of ignorance. Well, how does that follow? Well, for one, Socrates is known for associating with the youth. By and large, the people who he hangs out with in Athens, most of his quote unquote friends, associates, people who follow him around almost like some cult, they just like to watch him question people in power. Some of them very wealthy young men, little rich kids who like to see Socrates question their senator dad, you know. Look, Socrates, there's my dad. He's a dick. Go talk to him and make him look stupid, you know. So Socrates is known for associating with the youth. Well, if Socrates is corrupting the youth, and Socrates associates with and hangs out with the youth, then what's going to happen to old Socrates? If he corrupts the youth, he will be corrupting himself, right? Their corruption will bleed off onto him. And so he concludes that nobody knowingly would corrupt their associates. I would never knowingly corrupt the people who I associate with, because if I did that, their corruption would corrupt me. I might buy the first couple of premises he starts with, that no one wants to be corrupted. Depending on what you mean by corrupted, that just sounds like a bad word. You know, if you're talking about your health becomes corrupted, your financial stability becomes corrupted, whatever. It doesn't sound good. I'll give him that premise, and I'll even give him maybe the premise that if you hang out with corrupt people, you will probably be corrupted. You're likely at least to be corrupted. But this idea that nobody ever in the history of all humankind ever knowingly corrupts their associates. Maybe all these translations I've been reading of the Greek are make this argument weaker than it is. I'm not quite sure what Greek term is being translated as associates in this passage, but when you say someone you associate with, that's a pretty broad, you know, maybe like your true friends, your family, your loved ones. Maybe most people don't want to corrupt their people they hold dearest, but your associates, that could be anybody. I mean, how many business scandals have there been? How many Ponzi schemes involving all sorts of corrupt business dealers that were people were corrupting each other knowingly? And so I don't know, I think Socrates is being a bit naive in this assumption that sure, people corrupt each other knowingly all the time and associate with each other, on a regular basis. I'm not saying it's justified. I'm not defending that practice, but his argument hinges on this assumption, which I think is a false assumption. So I question the validity of this argument. The other argument, and so this is the next point. So first he starts with the whole, who improves the youth, who corrupts them, and kind of shows that Meletus is biased. Then the second part of his defense here, this cross-examination, is this whole thing on why one would never knowingly corrupt their associates. And then we get to this notion about atheism. Oh, but before I move on to that, I almost forgot. One of the, I guess, further conclusions that we're supposed to draw from that previous argument is that if Socrates is only corrupting the youth out of ignorance, then you should be a little bit more lenient. Okay, so either he's not doing it at all, or if he's doing it, he's doing it out of ignorance. And so if you have a friend who might be doing something like corrupting your other friends, but like you have a best buddy, let's say, and your best friend gets into some really bad stuff, and he starts telling your other friends to get into this really bad stuff, and you're like, hey man, that's not cool, but your friend doesn't realize it's not cool. Are you going to go turn your friend into the cops? Are you going to go put your friend on trial? Socrates says, no, you shouldn't do that. You should pull your friend aside and you should counsel them. And you should tell them, hey, you're corrupting your friends. You're corrupting all these people. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it. My bad. I'll stop. This is sort of the approach we should take. And so this is what Socrates is urging the jury, right? That, hey, I don't think I'm doing it, but even if I were doing it, it would definitely be unknowingly. And so you should just tell me what I'm doing wrong and why and how I'm a corrupting influence, and then I'll change my ways. You shouldn't put me on trial and condemn me to death, which is what they're about to do. We probably won't get that far today, but next class we'll see. Things get a bit more serious towards the end of the dialogue when Socrates realizes that they're about to sentence him to the death penalty. Okay, so now the last part here, we're almost done with Socrates' defense. I apologize, man. I keep complaining to my landlord. I keep complaining to my neighbors. I feel so sorry for these dogs. I don't know if you can hear these dogs outside, but they just keep barking and barking and barking. But every morning around this time, they just chain them up outside and just let them sit there and bark for hours. I don't know what to do, guys. I really apologize. I might find some way to soundproof the room. If you guys can hear it, let me know. Or if it's not that much of a problem, let me know. But it's distracting me. I'm trying not to let it, but I had to sort of call out the elephant in the room there. But let's get to this last part about atheism. So Meletus is accused here, and maybe Socrates has a bit of a point, but I think just like some of the previous arguments, he pulls a little bit too much and draws some conclusions from those points that I don't think are exactly warranted. Okay, so I can hear it, but it's not a problem. Doesn't bother me. Okay, cool. So I'll try not to let it bother me then, and just keep going. Okay, so anyway, so the atheist charge, he says, look, Meletus, you're not really being consistent here. You want to say that I don't respect the gods. You want to say that I teach about new gods and that I teach about new spiritual things. But at the same time, you want to say that I don't believe in the gods. So what is it? And at this point, Meletus says, look, you're just an atheist. You're an atheist. So what does that mean? It means, for Socrates, I guess he takes it as not believing in the gods, which is like sort of the I guess standard definition. Someone who doesn't believe in the gods. And what are the gods, right? Sorry, what are the gods? We're talking about the Greek gods here, the Olympic gods, right? The Olympian gods. Sorry, the Zeus and Hera and all this stuff. Some of you, a lot of you, most of you, from my experience, most of my students don't seem to have much knowledge of Greek mythology. They used to teach it to us way, way back when. I'm a child of the 80s, but I remember learning all this stuff like in grade school. I don't remember a lot of it. I had to relearn it myself on my own, but I think they've completely removed it from the curriculum. So if anybody wants to jump in and answer some of these questions, feel free, but I probably have to explain a little bit here. Socrates says, look, you have to make up your mind. You can't say that I teach spiritual things and I'm an atheist, because what's an atheist? Atheist is someone who doesn't believe in the gods. If I'm teaching spiritual things, I can't be an atheist. Why? Well, why not? Why not? And here's his argument. And I honestly don't think this is that strong of an argument. And again, I'll tell you why once we get through it. He says, well, if you look at the term spiritual things, what does that refer to? That's the big question. And this might be a false dichotomy. And certainly, if you're obvious, most of us, I doubt any of us are Greek pagans. I don't know, maybe there's some, I know there's still a few people out there. They're rare, but there are actually people who still believe in Zeus and all these Greek gods. They're very rare, but I'm going to assume most of us aren't, right? If you're religious at all, you're probably not a Greek pagan. But he's thinking like a Greek pagan because that's the time period he's living in. So he's saying, well, what are we talking about? We talk about spiritual things. We're either talking about the gods themselves. So we're talking about spiritual things. We're talking about gods. And you can't believe in the gods and be an atheist. That's contradictory. That contradicts the definition of atheism. But besides gods, what else could you possibly mean by spiritual things? Again, I think in like the Judeo-Christian tradition, you might be thinking of like other types of spirits, like angels or demons or something like this. But for the Greeks, they thought of the between humans and the gods, between the mortals and the immortal gods, were the demigods, or as they're referred to here in the reading, the bastard children of gods. Bastard children. Well, Zeus would often come down to earth and, you know, attack some fair maiden and impregnate her, and usually would not stick around to raise the kid. He would run off back to Mount Olympus and hide behind his wife, and then she'd find out about it and probably cause a lot of trouble for that mom, that poor mom down on earth. The Greek gods, for a large part, weren't exactly the best moral exemplars by our standards today, or by many standards, I guess you could say. But he says, well, look, if I believe in the gods, I'm not an atheist. If I believe in children of gods, I'm not an atheist. Because how can you believe in the children of gods if you don't believe in the gods? So by extension, yeah, I'm not an atheist either. Here's the problem I have, and again, maybe it has to do with the way that the Greek is traditionally translated, and maybe there's not as much ambiguity here. But he seems to be making the claim that an atheist would never teach of spiritual things unless they believed in them, and therefore they wouldn't be an atheist. So it's impossible for an atheist to teach of spiritual things. And I would say that that is absolutely empirically false. That you can find, I know examples. I know people. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to out them. But I wouldn't call him even a friend. I have no animosity towards this person, but he's a fellow philosophy professor, I guess you could say. I knew him before we both ever became professors. I knew him an undergraduate, but he's kept in touch with people who I actually am friends with. They know him better than me, and he was once very religious. He was once a very religious man, very Christian, very active in his church. And I think about 2 or 3 years after becoming philosophy major, he slowly and then eventually completely lost his faith, you know. And I think he still has respect for a lot of Christian theology and Christian doctrine, but he's definitely not a Christian anymore. He's agnostic, atheist, whatever. But I don't know if he still does this, because like I said, I don't know him that well. He's like an acquaintance. But last I heard about, he was still doing this. He was always very active in his church, and his church is a part of a network of churches across the country. And he's a very good public speaker on spiritual matters, spiritual things. And so he talks about Jesus and Jesus' love for you and Jesus' sacrifice for you. And he gives all these speeches and makes, you know, people get into tears about their faith in Christ, but he doesn't believe a word of it. Or he didn't. Again, I don't know if he still does this, you know. I used to get kind of angry when I heard this, even though personally I'm not very religious. I'm not religious at all. But I always thought that was a bit disingenuous, and it kind of, like, I don't know, just doesn't seem right. You know, it's like, why are you teaching something you don't believe in, and you're like lying to these people, and you're like, I just couldn't do it. And anytime I ever talked to him about it, he got real defensive. Oh man, the money's really good, and like, and I give them hope, and et cetera, et cetera. And you know, my knee-jerk reaction was very disdainful. Like, this guy's creepy and sleazy, and that's not a good thing to do. But I'm kind of on the fence about it. I still don't think, you know, his justification. I'm just, you know, I get paid for it is kind of a sleazy justification. But you know, I thought about, hey, if he's making people happy and giving them this spiritual uplifting feeling and making them better people and making them treat other people better and more kindly, etc., then I don't know. Maybe the ends justify the means. Sort of is how I don't know. It's complicated. I still am not really sure I even agree with that sentiment, but it's complicated, I suppose. But back to the argument here. You know, perhaps it's my own personal experience that's able to sort of call him out on this. But just because you are an atheist doesn't mean that you can't pretend not to be. Doesn't mean that you can't teach of spiritual things that you don't really believe in. And so I don't really think he's proving anything here. And on the other hand, I think that it does still demonstrate Meletus's inability to care about consistency and truth, and just wanting to smear Socrates at any cost. You know, Meletus is not thinking about logic, truth, and what's right. Meletus is just thinking about what is going to paint Socrates in the worst light, what is going to make him look the most vulgar. And atheism was something that was shunned. I guess you could still say today it's one of those things that people still look down, like they, people, in general. Unfortunately, I think that's a bad prejudice to have. But people assume that, I still encounter this a lot. Oh, you're not religious, then where do you get your values? Why are you just, what's wrong with murder if there's no God and you don't believe in Christ or Buddha or Muhammad or whoever that they are trying to, but this is goes back to the Greeks. People would get executed for not believing in the gods, and they'd at least get ostracized from society. And so I think Meletus, he's just calling him an atheist because that's the worst light he could shine on Socrates. He's trying to make him look bad, basically. And so I think it's pretty obvious he doesn't care about the consistency of his position. He just wants to, again, if this makes you look bad in this context, that's what you are. I can change my mind, depending on the light that you want to shine on you. So at this point in the dialogue, I think things get a little bit more serious, and that's basically the end of the defense. Socrates' defense consists primarily of what we were talking about at the very beginning of the lecture, this investigation, right? Look, I just went to investigate people with power, the poets, the artists, and the poets and the celebrities and all those types, the politicians, the craftsmen who build the city and have all this power. I made them angry, and they have a bias against me, and I kept doing it because I was on a mission from the gods. So I'm actually being pious. And then there's all this cross-examination of Meletus to show that he doesn't really care about corruption. He just wants to get Socrates in trouble. In fact, he knows nothing about who corrupts or who improves the youth. He just wants to get Socrates found. He wants to find Socrates. He wants the jury to find Socrates guilty. And they do. By a fairly slim margin, though, which we'll see in a moment. But as I said, this is where things get a little bit more serious. Once he's finished with his defense, he starts to, I guess, look around the crowd, and he realizes how dumbstruck. Everyone's looking at him like, why are you talking the way you're talking? Even though, I pointed this out in the last lecture, he warns them. He says, I'm going to be very direct. I'm going to say things you might not like. It might not be that persuasive, but it's the truth. Maybe you don't want to hear it, but it's the truth. But despite his warnings, I suppose they're still kind of shocked. Why are you not begging for acquittal? Why are you not kissing ass? Why are you not providing some defense, just pleading for some sort of acquittal or forgiveness? Instead, you're just doing what you've been doing that's gotten you here. You're making the people who hate you look foolish. And you're doing it in front of even a larger audience. Like, all these people are gathered here, and you're making Meletus look like a fool. You're reminding us of all the things you did with the politicians. You need to sort of say, look, I'm sorry. I'll leave you guys alone. I'll stop annoying you. I'll stop, questioning. Just please don't kill me. But he again, this is where he gets a little bit serious, and he starts to address them. And I guess, again, they must be looking at him like shocked. And he starts to address them. He says, this is, let me give you the page number, page 31, if you have the PDF, and it's line 28, 28b, in the margins. Socrates says, someone might say, are you not ashamed, Socrates, to have followed the kind of occupation that has led to your now being in danger of death? However, I should be right to reply to him, you are wrong, sir, if you think that a man who is any good at all should take into account the risk of life or death. He should look to this only in his actions, whether what he does is right or wrong, whether he's acting like a good or a bad man. According to your view, all the heroes who died at Troy were inferior people, especially the son of Thetis, who was so contemptuous of danger compared with disgrace, that when he was eager to kill Hector, and his goddess mother warned him, as I believe, in some such words as these, "My child, if you avenge the death of Patroclus, of your comrade Patroclus, and you kill Hector, you will die yourself, for your death is to follow immediately after Hector's." Once he heard this, he despised death and danger, and was much more afraid to live a coward who did not avenge his friends. "Let me die at once," he said, "when once I have given the wrongdoer his deserts, rather than remain here, a laughing stock by the curved ships, a burden upon the earth." Do you think he gave thought to death and danger? So here Socrates is comparing himself to Achilles, or as he refers to him, the son of Thetis. If you've ever read Homer, or maybe you've seen the movie Troy, or many of the other adaptations of Homer's Iliad, the war between the Trojans and the Greeks. Achilles is this warrior who decides that he's angry at the general, so he doesn't want to fight, even though he's the best warrior in the Achaean army. But his friend Patroclus is murdered by Hector, the general on the other side. So he decides, I'm going to go fight. I'm going to go back to battle, and I'm going to avenge my friend Patroclus. But his mother, who's a goddess, a demigoddess, she knows that if he does this, he's going to die. She knows his fate, that he'll get revenge. But if he gets his revenge on Hector for killing Patroclus, he'll die immediately after. If he goes home and retreats, he'll live a long, full life with a big kingdom and a beautiful wife and a beautiful family in a ripe old age with wealth. But he decides, I'm going to do what's right. So Socrates is comparing himself to Achilles. I'm standing up for what I believe in. I'm not fearing death, right? I'm not ashamed of sticking my neck out because I think I'm standing up for truth. You guys are standing up for deception. And so I want to be right. I want to be just. I don't care about being alive if I have to be unjust and not good and be a bad person. This is the truth of the matter, men of Athens. Wherever a man has taken a position that he believes to be best, or has been placed by his commander, there he must, I think, remain and face danger without a thought for death or anything else rather than disgrace. It would have been a dreadful way to behave, men of Athens, if at Potidaea, Amphipolis, and Delium, these are places where he fought for Athens against the Spartans in the Peloponnesian War. He says, it would have been a shame, and if at these places I had the risk of death like anyone else, remain in my post, where those you had elected to command me had ordered me, and then when the God ordered me, as I thought and believed, to live the life of a philosopher, to examine myself and others, if I had abandoned that post for fear of death or for anything else, that would have been a dreadful thing. And then I might truly have been justly brought here for not believing that there are gods, for disobeying the oracle, for fearing death and thinking I was wise when I was not. To fear death, gentlemen, is no other than to think oneself wise when one is not, to think oneself knows what one does not know. All right, so this is the first instance in this reading where Socrates brings up the topic of death, and because he's facing it, right? He knows it's coming, it's around the corner, and the people there are just aghast that he doesn't seem to be bothered too much by that. In fact, he's proud to have put himself into a situation like this because he thinks he's fighting for some cause, right? That God wants him to do what he's doing. And so this is happening for a reason. He's dying for some cause, for the truth, I suppose. And again, comparing himself to this warrior in battle, facing the enemy, not throwing his weapons down and begging to live, but standing up for his position and for what he believes is right. This is what it means to live, at the very least, this is what it means to live a good and just life. If he were up there trying to convince them to just let him go no matter what, and he'll do anything for them, that's undignified. Okay, so for him, he'd rather live a dignified and wise, good life, I suppose, for lack of a better word, than one of deception, and one where he runs from death at every turn, at the expense of morality, at the expense of justice. So, there might be issues with this, and I mean, I want these lectures to remain slightly short, so I'm going to stop it there. Let me stop sharing the screen here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause the recording in just a moment. But basically, oh geez, I think I totally messed things up. Where are we at here? Okay, so basically, we're going to begin class next time. The next lecture, sorry. So the next lecture is going to be on Thursday at 1 p.m. If you can make it, that would be great. If you can't, I will post the recording of it later on Thursday afternoon or early Thursday evening. But basically, we're going to finish the apology. So if you haven't finished reading it, go ahead and finish it. But we're going to look at some of these serious comments, to sort of this change of tone in Socrates, and these reflections on death, and why we shouldn't fear it, and why, as he says, it's unwise. Why is, it's thinking you know what you don't know. Let's sort of kind of unpack why that's true and what he means by that. And some of the other arguments he makes, he seems to get pretty, what's the right word for this? He sort of chastises the accusers for being such jerks, right? Like, you guys think you're harming me, but really you're harming yourself. And so there's this interesting notion of harm, and that we're going to have to somehow unravel, and it's going to get a bit metaphysical. It seems like this so far, this reading has been a very ethical, kind of political essay, or defense, talking about corruption in the city, and what he does is good for the city, and he's promoting truth and living a good life. But we'll look at some of these other aspects of the dialogue. Again, he talks about how the people who are murdering him and sentencing him to death are actually harming themselves more than they're harming him. What could he possibly mean by that? Well, I think I'm rambling on, so I'm going to go and stop recording the lecture now.